What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. Well, the NBA season is over. The Boston Celtics have taken the NBA championship 4-1 over the Dallas Mavericks. We talked last week kind of ad nauseum about what this means for the Celtics, what happened to the Mavericks. The Celtics were up 3-0 last time we talked, and we kind of knew how this series was going to end, that Dallas was probably going to take game 4 and then go right back to the team that we had seen the first 3 games of the series in game 5, which is exactly what happened. So if you're here to celebrate the Boston Celtics championship, congratulations, but you should probably go back and listen to last week's episode. This week's episode, we're going to touch on the very end of the Celtics and Mavericks series, why the NBA Finals ratings are declining every year, and then what lessons we can learn from the two teams that just played in the NBA championship. And then a couple of thoughts at the end of this podcast on the NBA draft that's coming up a week from today. We're recording this on June 19th. The draft is on the 26th next week. So Matt and Clint are going to join me in just a moment to do all that. But before we get started, you can reach out to us on Gmail, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. Really appreciate you guys listening, and we would love to hear from you. Fouled Out is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. And we are now available on YouTube. Our entire backlog of episodes have been uploaded to YouTube, as well as every weekly episode now dropping on YouTube as well. So if you prefer to listen to your podcast on YouTube, you can search Fouled Out and check us out there. But for now, let's go grab Matt, let's grab Clint, and let's talk NBA basketball. Let's go. All right, Matt is here. Clint is here. Guys, how you doing?
Warm.
Better than I have since, well, whatever the day was that Monty was hired.
Yeah, I planned out this whole podcast, and I was like, did all this research on NBA Finals ratings and how they've changed over time and what fans care about and all this stuff. I got like 5 pages of notes, and I was like, I got to scrap almost everything that I wrote down because the Pistons fired Monty Williams today. And I know that this is the best day that Matt's had in a long time, and maybe the best day for Detroit basketball since 2004. I don't know how you're feeling, Matt.
I mean, this is the most hope I've had for this team in a very long time. Like, my God, I was terrified that they were going to just run him back out there this year. And by all reports, like, this was a situation where Gores was like fully on board with like, yeah, no, like, we're good. You can get the fuck out.
It's so crazy. It's been 1 year after they gave him the biggest contract in the history of coaching, and they're firing him with 4 years, $65 million left on his deal.
Yeah.
That they have to pay. I think this is the thing, though, because, Matt's been asking for this basically since we started talking about basketball again. I think it was like our first episode post Super Bowl this year where we're like, yeah, we're going to talk about basketball. And the very first thing Matt said was, we need to fire Monty Williams. And this was 4 months ago. And a lot of the public opinion was like, there's no way that they fire him. It's been 1 year. They owe him $65 million, whatever it is. But I think the thing, like, people are going to be like, oh, I don't want to have to pay Monty Williams $65 million and another coach, blah, blah, blah. I don't really give a shit what the billionaires that own these teams do with their money.
I was going to say, you don't have to pay any of it.
It's not like cap space where you have a finite amount. You just pay coaches however much you want. And we're going to find out how much one team can possibly pay coaches this offseason when the Pistons hire whoever the next guy is, because holy shit, it's going to be a lot of money. UConn. That would be absolutely hysterical if the Lakers offered him a job and he said no to take the Pistons job.
And then the Lakers hired Monty Williams.
That would be funny.
Oh
Matt and I were
God.
talking about Danny Hurley not taking the Lakers job, and Matt's like, "Yeah, well, you probably got to see if LeBron's going to be there or not," and blah blah. And I was like, "Yeah, if I was going to take that job, I would want to make sure LeBron is not going to be there because he's going to
Yeah.
throw you under the fucking
Yep.
bus in year one."
You don't get to coach with LeBron. Like
No.
that's just what it is. Like and the circus that they got going on out west right now is a fucking joke. And it's like, why would I leave the opportunity to three-peat to go coach those bozos? Like,
I
Yeah.
also like I think in college when you're someone like Danny Hurley who's won 2 straight national championships, you're like the man. You are that program.
Yep.
You're bigger than any of the players because the players kind of come and go within 3 to 4 years, right? And in the
yeah.
NBA, like you're just the bitch basically when you're the coach because you're the guy, especially on the Lakers, that all the fans and the front office and the players are all going to blame. Like, look at what happened to Darvin Ham and Frank Vogel and anybody
Look,
that's ever coached the
Yep.
Lakers.
Yeah.
okay, so I was like watching a YouTube short today. Lawrence Fishburne, who plays Doc Rivers in the show, didn't know who Doc Rivers was.
That's
I I wish I had that ignorant bliss.
so that's kind of the thing is like, yeah, if I was Danny Hurley, I wouldn't want to go to the NBA either, unless you offered me some absolutely ludicrous amount of money. But you're making a ton of money coaching at UConn, so like, why go somewhere where you gotta be everybody's like whipping boy, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I think in certain organizations, like if you're under Pat Riley or if you're in San Antonio, that doesn't happen. And I think that like give him a couple of years, he could probably command that respect. But it's like you don't want to go to LA because like you're the first person that they're going to point fingers at. Like instead of going to some place that supports their coaches like the Heat or the Spurs, where it's like, no, there's like a hierarchy here. We follow the hierarchy. Like this is how it is. If you don't like it, you can pound sand and get out. So I think it was wise for him not to take the position strictly because I think it's a fucking trap. And it just sets him up for like you don't win in that situation. If you win, it's because LeBron drug you there, and if you lose, it's because you didn't do enough for LeBron.
Yeah, if I was him, I also
Yeah.
wouldn't want to take the Pistons job because if you don't do
No.
great, Matt's gonna fucking cook you on this podcast for 4 months. That might be worse than what happens in LA.
No. There's a difference between like not winning games right away and being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna bench Jaden Ivey just to bench him, and we're gonna play Killian Hayes, who's not in the league. We're gonna start Killian Hayes, a guy who, like 2 months later, totally out of the league.
Gotta add that veteran grit, baby.
Yeah, but I mean it's been about a month since they brought in Langdon to be the president of basketball operations, and obviously very limited sample size, but everything he has done so far has looked real good. I mean, he got rid of the number one guy you need to get, well, the top two guys that you need to get rid of, right? In Weaver and Monty. They hired Fred Vinson, who is like one of the elite shooting coaches in the NBA, which is something that this team has been like struggling with for the last 10 years, getting shooters or developing shooters. So like
Best shooting coach with 2 first names.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can't wait till later this offseason when they sit down with Paul George and they say, Paul, who is your preferred coach? Who would you like to coach the Pistons? Because we've just given you a max contract and we think you should make this decision.
I would fucking bury my head at the beach if that happened.
That's like the funniest thing. We're going to talk about the NBA Finals here in a little bit. I thought the single funniest thing about the NBA Finals was that they had Paul George and Joel Embiid on like the pregame desk. And I was like, man, could you have found two people who know less about being in the NBA Finals than Paul George and Joel Embiid?
Who's that guy game 5, Matt?
I had no idea who that was.
Yeah, I don't know
Honestly.
either.
That guy that you guys don't know probably knows more about the NBA Finals than Paul George does. Like,
I mean, I assume, yeah.
I would have done a full 180 on Paul George if they were like, Paul, what did the Dallas Mavericks have to do to win game 4 of the finals? And Paul's just like, I have no fucking clue. Because I've never been there and I never will. So I'm the wrong person to ask. I don't understand why I'm on this show. Where
Fair.
like you're not airing the show that has Shaquille O'Neal on it, who's been in a shitload of finals. Right? Like
Jaguar Black. I'm
don't
down
need
with
those
that.
guys.
I am Kazam.
And he's been in Kazam. Probably more important experience than his 5 or 6 NBA finals.
It should
More
be at the top
impactful
of
as a
his
youth
resume
for me.
for sure.
That's for sure. Yeah.
They do the whole like setup for the NBA finals, and they're like, Shaq, what was it like to play Kazam? And he's like, oh, let me tell you.
Who dares disturb me from my sleep?
How many Shazam quotes can we throw out on this podcast before people turn it off?
3. I'll stop.
Speaking of turning things off, Celtics are the official NBA champions. I mentioned in the open to the podcast. This is going to come off super hatery now that the series is over and it's a 4-1 win by the Celtics. But
okay, in fairness, if you say anything negative about any Boston team, Boston fans immediately go to, well, you're just a hater. So
I know this because I'm a Boston fan for every sport except for basketball. Like, you just hate Tom Brady. Like Adam, I was talking about the Red Sox. It doesn't change the fact that you hate Tom Brady. The last 4 series of the NBA playoffs were very meh.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the last 3 series combined, so the 2 conference finals and then the NBA finals, were 14 games. The Celtics sweep Indy, the Mavs win 4-1 over Minnesota, and then the Celtics 4-1 over the Mavs. It's hard to feel like people really care about this NBA finals.
Yeah.
You know, it feels like there's something missing the last couple of years. Like it really stood out to me this year, but really like the last couple, it feels like there's a certain like gravitas that's missing from the NBA finals that I haven't really seen post COVID, I think. And the ratings really back that up. I went and looked up all of the ratings from the bubble onwards today. So the first game of the NBA finals and the last game of the NBA finals tend to be the most watched. Like whatever the last game is, whether it ends in like 4, 5, 6, 7, that tends to be the most watched game. So I went back and I looked at the peak rating for all of the NBA finals. The bubble did a 4.8, which is the worst rating for an NBA final since the TV was invented. But there was obviously a lot going on there. I think people had a lot more going on in 2020 or whatever that was.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. They played those games during the day, too, didn't they?
I think the NBA finals games were at night. I think they were like primetime games. But I think with everything going on, you know, when I first looked at it, I was like, what were people doing aside from watching the NBA finals? Because we were all locked in our houses. But I think there was a lot more important stuff going on in people's lives than LeBron versus Jimmy Butler in the bubble.
Well, yeah, they had to watch Tiger King.
That was
Tiger
dope.
King. Hey, Tiger King did better ratings than the NBA finals that year. 100%.
By a lot. By a lot.
So we get out of the bubble. We go to Bucks and Suns, which peaked at a 6.6, which also horrible for the NBA finals. Warriors Celtics is 7.5. Nuggets Heat is a 7. And then this year, game 5 did a 6.3.
What is it out of 10?
No. So for reference, the NBA finals prior to the bubble, Raptors Warriors did a 10.7. And then all of the Warriors Cavs did 10.4, 13.5, 15.8, and 13.4.
Wow.
And
okay.
Yeah, you go to all of the NBA finals before that with like the Heatles and the Spurs and like all that stuff. And they're all pretty consistently like 12, 13 range. So it's pretty obvious that like interest has declined in watching the NBA finals. And I was trying to think about why that is today. I was like, God, why do we just kind of feel like, okay, like Celtics won? And, I think for more hardcore basketball fans and like people who talk about basketball like us, that the post-COVID NBA has been kind of fun because we've had 5 different champions in 5 years. And it feels like there's a lot of parity in the league. But I've really gotten to the point where I wonder if parity is a good thing for the NBA as a whole, just because they seem like they're losing a lot of casual fans to other things. Like, Matt mentioned Tiger King. Seems like people talked more about Tiger King during COVID than they talked about the NBA finals.
Yeah.
So
I think the cross section of that, though, I feel like Tiger King is not a good indicator, because it's like you're getting people. So the Venn diagram that's in my head right now is the people who like watching murder porn and like cold case files and all that shit. And then it's like the absurdity of a documentary called Tiger King with this guy who like was fucking about with a bunch of wild animals. And it's just like I kind of liken that to a NASCAR race, where it's like, okay, the casual fan isn't tuning into a NASCAR race to watch like Matt Kenseth win. They're tuning in to see the big one, like the gnarly wreck that happens that wipes out like 5 or 6 cars, right? And that's like you get the frat bros and everybody else jumping on because it's like the lunacy is hysterical. So I don't know if it's fair to compare the finals to Tiger King. However,
I mean, I think that year though, like clearly there was, I think we can say like a societal impact, because during that period of time,
oh
like,
yeah,
there
sure.
was definitely like a big thing of like all the things that were coming out and being super popular on Netflix and all the other streaming services during that time. Like there was a huge social factor of like, yeah, we're all gonna talk about these things.
Yeah, the zeitgeist that comes with, yeah.
it is funny. There was so much division during COVID, just between like political parties, and then you obviously have all the protests going on, and like the Black Lives Matter movements, like kind of at its peak during that point, right around that time. And it's like, we all really need something to bring us all back together, something that we can all bond over. And it's fucking Tiger King.
It was fucking Carol Baskin. It was Carol Baskin.
Carol Baskin saved America.
Killed her.
She fed her husband to a goddamn tiger.
I know.
You can't tell me that it didn't happen. Fed them to tigers, they snacking.
Sometimes you need a villain like Carol Baskins to unite America.
That's the perfect point for exactly what I'm talking about with the NBA, though. Is like, it feels like we need a villain. Is like, the NBA ratings were doing super well in the finals when we saw LeBron and Steph every single year. Like, people did not get bored of it, even though we saw it 4 years in a row. And then people loved the Raptors versus Warriors finals because it was like, finally, someone is taking down the Kevin Durant Warriors, who felt like the final boss.
Mm-hmm.
And then before that, you had the Heatles that we all hated. And we're like, the 2011 finals is a lot of people's favorite finals because that's Dirk Nowitzki and JJ Barea taking down LeBron James and Dwayne Wade in their first year with the Heat. And
that was awesome.
Everybody was rooting against the Heat. Like, everybody's like, fuck the Heat. Before that, you have like, the big 3 Boston Celtics. You have Kobe with the Lakers. You have Kobe and Shaq back in the day. Like, it does feel like when there's this final boss that people are more invested in watching them go down.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to 2004, it wasn't just like Shaq and Kobe. Like, they went out of all right, we're going to bring Karl Malone. We're going to bring in Gary Payton. Like, it was a loaded up Lakers team. Yeah, like that. There was a very big thing back then of like, no, fuck these guys.
I think there is a villain. I just think that like he hasn't gotten his shine yet, or like his villainy moment, and I think it's because like he hasn't strictly been on top. Or at least this is my opinion, and it's probably because we're like entrenched basketball fans. But I think Luka is on his way there to being that guy. But like the last 2 to 3 games in the series, it looked like the spark was out of his eyes. Like there were times in game 5 I was watching, and it was like Luka would much rather be doing anything else than like playing in this game tonight. And I mean, like, yeah, he's probably fucking exhausted and all the other stuff, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's easier to hate on LeBron because like he's been there and it's kind of like a meme to like watch him lose because all the self-aggrandizing and stuff. Like that's one of the reasons why I like to watch him lose because it's just like, yeah, dude, you're an asshole. Like I don't know what else to say about it. But on the other hand, like Luca kind of like relishes the role, it appears at sometimes. Like he's cheeky and likes it. And then other times it's like the the analogy I'm seeing is James Harden looking for his mouthpiece on the floor. Like he just doesn't know where he's at or like didn't expect it. And it was like kind of sad to like see him out there playing like that. I was like, God damn, dude, like put some effort in. Like,
Yeah, I think that someone just needs to make like the major villain move, right? Because if we think about who the villains have been throughout the last 20 years or whatever, it's the Kevin Durant Warriors. It's the Warriors come back from 3-1 versus Kevin Durant. He leaves in free agency and takes like quote unquote the hardest road. And then we're all just like, oh, okay, fuck this guy. Like, oh. And then they come and they just dominate the league for multiple years. The Heatles, like I think about LeBron James before the decision. I don't really feel like people hated LeBron James that much. I think, Pistons fans did.
Pistons fans did.
But it was for on-court reasons, right? Like, because he came to Detroit and fucking cooked the Pistons.
Well, that and like there was always that like just the way he carries himself and his personality. Like we saw it because we played him a lot, and I don't think many people caught on until that moment.
Yeah. So I mean, he does the decision, forms the super team in Miami, and everybody's like, "You guys have ruined the league. Screw! Oh, we hate this." If you were either a Miami fan and loved Miami, or you hated Miami, and that was it.
Yeah.
Even before
the field
that, like,
or Miami.
Yeah, the Shaq and Kobe Lakers like dominated so long, and then they lose one finals, and then add Karl Malone and Gary Payton, and it's like, oh god, these guys, like, so we need that like super team move kind of thing, like the really shitty Giannis demands a trade out of the Milwaukee and says I will only play in Dallas kind of thing, and then you're like, oh, these guys, I hate these guys. But the other thing I was thinking about is that we haven't had a really good NBA rivalry in a while. Like for years there, it was LeBron versus Steph Curry. And if you were a LeBron hater, you probably loved Steph Curry because you're like, this guy's awesome. He keeps beating LeBron in the finals. This is fun. You can go back throughout time and say like, oh, it's, this guy versus this guy. And for the last couple of years, like the NBA finals matchups, it's like, there's nothing beyond the on-court stuff to get you excited for this series. And for people like us, like that's totally fine. Like we're all excited. We're talking on the podcast about like the technical aspects, but for casual fans, Celtics versus Mavs isn't really doing it for you.
That's not a sexy matchup.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I was thinking about earlier today is that like one of the side effects of the player empowerment movement, which for the sake of this conversation, I'm not saying is either good or bad, but I think we've seen less animosity between players, right? I think players are generally, big picture, more friendly with each other across the league. And so, yeah, like you don't have those like really bitter rivalries literally between the players, right? So like, I mean, we've all seen like
unless you're Nikola Jokic, then it's settled immediately on the court and you end someone's career.
Yeah, but like we've all seen like all the snippets of like Reggie Miller and all those other guys like back, like that's none of that today. And like, so like when you take all the drama out of it, like, yeah, like casual fans, they just have less to be interested in.
I wouldn't say there's none. So like some of the examples I would use is like James Harden, but it's like, dude, you're like a loser and a whiny bitch. So like no one cares about what you have to say about Giannis. Because Giannis is such like a stand-up guy. It's like, why the fuck are you taking shots at him? Like of all the people, like you're just making yourself look like a clown, dude. Like so you have those kinds of things.
All I know is that LeBron is still dodging Isaiah Stewart. He's still running.
Have you seen Isaiah Stewart? I would run from that guy too. No, I mean you have some like kind of more minor things like the Jokic Embiid thing is kind of a thing. And like if we had Nuggets versus 76ers in the finals, then you could kind of talk that angle up.
Well, and the Jokic Embiid thing might matter if Embiid were capable of getting past the second round, but he's not.
But like even in this finals, it was like, Kyrie comes back to Boston after a messy breakup. And at the end of game 5, Kyrie is just going over and high-fiving and hugging like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. He's like, you guys earned it. You're the best, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, cool. Thanks, Kyrie. But I was thinking about the rivalry thing as well because the WNBA.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Had a regular season game featuring Caitlin Clark's team versus Angel Reese's team.
The Chicago Skyline and the Indiana Fever, for those who don't know that.
That was for me because I didn't know that. I'm kidding. I did, but they played a regular season game the other day, and the ratings for that game were up like 225% over that same segment last year. So, which it's still not a ton because it was only 3 million people that watched the game compared to 12 million that watched the NBA finals. So it's like, oh God, the NBA finals is really, really struggling. They only did a 7.3, which is 12.2 million viewers. And the WNBA is like, we're at an all-time high for 3 million. But
and we're still losing money.
Yeah, there's definitely more interest in the WNBA though. And especially like that rivalry between the two of them. Like people are interested in watching it. And Caitlin Clark goes up for a layup and Angel Reese tries to take her goddamn head off. I was like, this is what the NBA is missing is like this rivalry, these two people who like genuinely do not like each other.
Yep.
Going at it, and I miss it. And you go all the way back to like Bird versus Magic and like, yeah, those guys did like each other, but there was like an intense there was this underlying tension between the two of them always because they were always compared to each other. Right.
Well, and those guys are like, Magic's like my boy, but he coming in second place. Like they weren't afraid to talk like when it came to competition. I don't think they called anybody out like character wise or anything like that, or like said inappropriate stuff. But like, yeah, they would jaw and they would get into each other's craw and whatnot a little bit on the court, and like they were fiery. But I think the difference between back then and now is it's like, yeah, there are moments where it's like, okay, these guys were super fired up and there'd be like a shoving match or whatever. And it's like, I don't think the NBA wants that. Just because of the optics, like they've tried to get away from the quote unquote like bruiser thug league image for a very long time. And I think that like with how people are being raised nowadays, it's like, well, you don't have to have conflict with your friends. Like you're just going and playing a game. Where I think during Bird and like Magic's era, it was like, you can be my friend, but like once we step on the court, like I'm going to annihilate you.
You don't have to like literally do shitty stuff off the court. Like Jordan and Isaiah Thomas weren't like meeting up in an alley to like throw down, but like, yeah, they fucking hated each other.
Isaiah Thomas would have enjoyed that.
Yeah.
No, that's what I was gonna say though. Is like I don't think we need like the equivalent of the bad boy Pistons beating the literal shit out of Michael Jordan every time he goes up for a layup. But like, I mean, LeBron and Curry, there wasn't anything really bad there, but it was a good rivalry. People were invested because it's, oh, this guy is one of the best players of all time chasing Jordan. And now Like, and he's like this 6'9" behemoth athletic freak. And then on the other side, there's this kind of undersized guard who was not the first overall draft pick, like dude who came from Davidson without a lot of fanfare coming into the league, who just turned into a guy who revolutionized the league and one of the best players of his generation, is literally blocking LeBron from winning multiple finals. Right. So they
The
have to build some
storyline's
kind of,
better.
yeah, they got to build some
Mhm.
kind of storyline. And I think it's hard with the foreign guys because people like Luka and Jokic and Giannis are amazing basketball players. There's no denying that,
Mhm.
but they're not as famous off the court as people like Steph Curry and LeBron and Kevin Durant were. You know, and even like Carmelo Anthony and Chris Paul, I think those guys are way more famous off the court than any of the foreign guys that are in the league right now.
So
I
are
think
you saying that when Jokic when the Nuggets won last year, that Jokic should have sounded more like Jason Tatum? I
I
think he
love it.
literally said like the job is done. I can go home now.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I love that about Jokic, but I'm talking about like
Yeah.
from the casual fan perspective.
Mhm.
If Jokic was just like, you know what? I'm way better than Joel Embiid.
You know what?
That's
Fuck
why
this
I keep
guy in
winning MVPs.
particular.
Yeah, he's like,
Yeah.
Joel never should have won his MVP. It was stolen from me because you all bitched about it.
He
That would draw people in.
what he needs to do is what the rest of us do, and just relentlessly shit on Rudy Gobert.
That's the rivalry. Rudy Go, like if it was like Wolves Cavs in the finals, I think you could have the Rudy Gobert versus Donovan Mitchell thing. But
Yeah.
I was thinking about how do we build the next great rivalry in the NBA, and I was having trouble coming up with what the rivalry would be. But the one thing I know for sure is that it has to involve Anthony Edwards.
He was the first guy that came to mind when we started talking about a villain, because he's the guy that, well, maybe not like his game being to the level of like, yeah, like I'm like one of the top guys in the league. He's the one that's got the personality to do it.
Yeah, that was my thought, is like he has that like superstar charisma and magnetism. There's a show coming out on Netflix. I think it comes out soon, where they're going to follow multiple basketball players. Like, you remember that quarterback show they did last year with
Yeah.
like Kirk Cousins and those guys? They're
Yeah.
doing that with basketball players, and one of the guys in the show is Anthony Edwards. And people are going to eat that shit up when Anthony Edwards is on the screen. So I was thinking it has to involve him. He doesn't necessarily have to be the villain, I don't think, but like he has to be in the rivalry. But if you look at who else is available, like who is going to be Anthony Edwards' rival? Like, is it going to be Luka? Could it be Luka versus Ant for the next however many years?
I think that would be the most fun.
Yeah, I was thinking about like the East and like how we would get these guys in the NBA Finals. I'm just like, I don't know who in the East is going to step up and be like someone that we really care about over the next 3 to 5 seasons.
Yeah, I mean,
tell me why it's Cade Cunningham.
because Fred Vinson is going to turn him into an elite shooter, and then you're not going to know what to do with him. He was already putting up like 25, like 7 and 5.
I think it's going to take somebody to have a heel turn, like honestly, like a WWE kind of deal. I was thinking about the like the foreign powers in the NBA right now, and it just seems like, or at least Jokic and Giannis, like winning was important to them, but like the stardom or like the fame that comes with that is not important. So like, yeah, like Jokic fucks off to his horse barn and stuff, and then like Giannis doesn't do an awful lot to generate a bunch of attention off the court after he wins the finals, right? So it's like, I don't really know if like, it's almost like those guys are just like too polite, or like their priorities are in like a different spot as far as that's concerned. It was fun to like hate on Kobe when he was in the league, because it was like, yeah, he was arrogant and boisterous, and like he believed he was the best, and that's why like a lot of people like to hate on him. Similar to think of like a LeBron. And I think Anthony Edwards could be that guy, but I don't know if that's like where he's at right now. Um, and like I think he needs to grow into that a little bit too.
Mhm.
But I don't see Tatum and Brown being that because they're just fucking super nice to everyone and they're more worried about lifting their teammates up than putting other people down. So like I don't think you're
Yeah.
gonna see it out of them. I mean, Boston could be a villain, but I think they kind of have the same cachet that Golden State did, where it's like, okay, I think people would rather see them in the finals because they have like some history there than, some other team like Indiana.
This is a huge if that I'm going to throw out there. But we go into next year. Obviously, Giannis will be healthy again. If we see Dame bounce back to the quality of play that we had seen the year before, he is vocal and verbally aggressive enough on the court that I could definitely see him embodying a little bit of that villain mentality.
Yeah, the hard thing is like, is Dame going to be around for 3 to 5 more seasons at a
No,
high level to fuck with the Celtics?
no,
No.
Right.
that's
So
3 is probably his absolute max.
one I could see that would be really fun is if the Knicks are somehow able to acquire Devin Booker and pair him with Jalen Brunson, and then Knicks fans are just absolutely unbearable next season. It's like, okay, like Knicks Celtics would be super fun if you had Brunson and Booker versus that Celtics squad coming back. But that's like, again, is it going to be a rivalry or is it just like, oh yeah, Jason Tatum and Devin Booker are really good friends actually, and like, high fives all around, fun series, guys. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
It's like hard to look at next season and really think that there's a lot of storylines going into the year aside from, can the Celtics back up the talk, now that they're like, oh, we're the champs, we're the best team in the league, which can't argue with because they just won, but like, are they going to be good enough next year to kind of put away the haters saying, oh, well, you only got there because you faced an all hospital squad in the playoffs
Yeah.
so far? And then is Jokic just going to win another MVP? Who knows? But
I think a new storyline comes when LeBron's out of the league. Like, honest to God, like I think that's what it takes because like there's so much buzz about the coaching position and stuff going on over there that like anyone else could like it doesn't fucking matter. It's like who's coaching the Lakers? And it's like one of the things that will be sad, and Matt, this is probably you're like going to lament this with like LeBron leaving the league, is there is going to be like a space that has to be filled, and there's going to be like a little bit of like a open place there. And I do think that like the league losing one of like the faces that built it into the industry that it is today is like it's not fun. Like love hating on LeBron as much as the next guy, but like once he's gone, I think it opens the space up for somebody else to come in and have that. And I hope journalism gets a little more interesting than wondering what the fuck LeBron's doing in his spare time, because I feel like that's also going to be ESPN talking about the pickleball league and all this other stupid shit he's involved with. It's just like, I don't fucking care about that. Like,
I do think that's the one potential storyline we didn't talk about that could really make like a new villain in the league is, where does LeBron go next season? Because if he goes to Philly and it's like LeBron and Embiid, who everybody's starting to hate, like that could be a team that
would
like,
absolutely light a fire under me to.
Yeah, I might still root for that team to beat the Celtics next season.
I'd have to disown the Sixers. I would hate that. I would fucking hate that.
I hate the Sixers. So the other thing I thought was interesting from the finals is like anytime there's an NBA finals, Matt and I look at it and we're like, okay, what is the incorrect lesson that everybody's going to learn from this finals and try to copycat these teams? And what is the correct lesson? And I could see people looking at the finals and being like, oh, the Celtics built this team based on having like 2 awesome switchable wings. We really need to like find a way to get 2 top 10 wings or 2 top 15 wings, wherever you rank those guys. And it's like, yes, this is something we've known, and it's something that is extremely difficult to do.
Yep.
So I wouldn't chase that. But one thing I've been looking at is, when you are a team that is up against the salary cap and locked into a core, like Dallas was a couple of years ago when they lost in the Western Conference Finals, or like the Celtics have been for a long time now, kind of banging their head against the glass ceiling with this like Marcus Smart, the two J's, Al Horford core. How do you take that kind of team and put them over the top?
Pritchard.
And I think, yeah, pretty much just Peyton Pritchard. You just need to acquire him this offseason. Get a small white man who can hit half quarters and you're done. That's
consistently.
Literally the only thing he does, but he does it better than most guys shoot regular 3-pointers.
It's fucking wild. I think a realistic answer is like the supporting cast. Hauser did a fucking phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Kristaps, when he played really well. And I think I think the issue isn't necessarily like you could have your 2 all-star talents, but you got to have people who can switch like small forward to power forward or center. I think Hauser did like a fucking really good job of that in the finals. And like the rotational defense that Boston had throughout like the majority of the finals was very good. And I think that's what it comes down to. Because like once Brown and Tatum were hitting shots, that opened things up for everybody else. And then, like the role players were getting involved. They're like they did really well shooting the ball. And I think that just comes with rhythm and having the opportunity to get open looks. And I don't think that specifically comes from the 2 best players. So like I don't think like Brunson and Booker would be able to do that unless they had the supporting cast to be able to allow them to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I was kind of thinking more about the fact that both the teams we saw in the NBA Finals this year took big swings on distressed assets from other parts of the league. Like the Mavs were up against the salary cap. They're like, what do? We have a chance to acquire Kyrie Irving. Mm-hmm. And they go out and they do that. And everybody's like, oh my God, I can't believe you guys would go out and get Kyrie Irving. And I think Clint's point about supporting cast plays into that too, because you look at how the Mavs kind of remade themselves around the trade deadline this year. That was a big part of their finals run too. But also on the Celtics side, you have Marcus Smart, who we've talked about for years is kind of like the heart and soul of that team. And you make that trade and bring in Kristaps Porzingis, who was a distressed asset going into this year. Like he was a super talent who could never stay healthy and had kind of bounced around the league. So you bring him in and get rid of Smart in that trade, which is like a huge shot to the psyche of the Celtics. And Drew falling in your lap because Cronin wanted to cuck the Miami Heat also doesn't hurt. But I look at my team is a good example of this. And I'm not trying to shoehorn my team into this podcast, but like the Sacramento Kings have $151 million dedicated for next year already. And that's before doing a Malik Monk contract, which he's probably going to leave because the NBA rules are stupid and we can only offer him $78 million for 4 years, while other teams are allowed to offer him like $100 million for 4 years. So he's probably gone because of the stupid CBA. But we're at 151 million. The cap is 141 million next year. So it's like, okay, how does this team get better? And that's the type of team I would like want to take a swing on a distressed asset from around the league. Take the swing. It could definitely backfire, but when it pays off, you get a really good player for cheap. And it's hard to find, but I did make a list of guys I feel like are distressed assets this summer who are going to be acquirable for a team like the Kings or the Lakers or, the Heat, any of these teams that are really kind of up against the cap situation and don't have a ton to trade. So the first one was Zach LaVine. Mm-hmm. Zach has 3 years of over $40 million a year left on his deal. He's had a ton of injuries, can't stay healthy, but he's only 2 seasons removed from being a multiple time All-Star and averaging 25 points a game. There was a rumor earlier that the Kings had been calling the Bulls trying to work out like a Zach LaVine and Alex Caruso trade, which I will be pounding the table for all offseason if they can pull that off, because it's like the Bulls are looking to like dump Zach LaVine's salary basically at this point. And if you can get an asset out of that and take a swing on someone like Zach LaVine, I would be super interested in that. Klay Thompson looked absolutely cooked, but he's a free agent. I don't know if the Warriors are even going to let him walk because Joe Lacob loves his players so much. But, the last 3 years, he shot 39% from three on 9 attempts per game, 41% on 10.6 attempts per game, and then 38.5% on 9.3 attempts per game. So I think you could talk yourself into the fact that they didn't make the playoffs this year, and he's going to have a longer offseason, kind of recuperate. He's going to want to have a bounce back after last year. And you sign him as a free agent, you don't even have to give up anything. It's just money. Also listed Mikal Noodles Bridges. The greatest nickname that Matt and I found out about today is that they call him Noodles.
I don't know who they are, but thank you.
Basketball Reference has the craziest nicknames next to guys' names. They call him Brooklyn Bridges and Noodles and Go Inspector Gadget. I was like, who the fuck calls him this? Nobody calls him that. But he was a guy who last year it was completely unconscionable that they would even put him in a trade conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's rumors about him. So he's a guy who's more expensive, but there's other options. There's Miles Bridges from the Hornets, who's a great player, but has the domestic violence history. LaMelo Ball, Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, Jared Allen. There's a lot of guys that I think teams could look at, kind of talk themselves into and take that swing on this offseason to kind of try to step it up a level like the Mavericks and the Celtics did.
I don't think I'd take a swing on Zach LaVine. I don't think the guy's ever really played a full season. He played 82 games his second season in the league. But other than that, he's missed chunks of time. 2022, 2023, he only missed a handful of games, but the rest of them are in the 60s and 50s. This year he played 25. I don't like that, specifically because you might be like a good talent, but it's like you're not reliable. I don't know if you're going to be there or not. And that uncertainty is not something I would want to deal with. And that's like the injury history. If it's me, if I'm Miami, I think and taking the guy that you were talking about out of what was it, Charlotte, with the DV stuff,
yeah,
I think if he
Bridges.
gets him involved with like a strong program that has leadership who are going to be like, no, you're going to pull your fucking head out of your ass and we're going to give you an opportunity to win. That could be a positive thing for him, but the injury risk and stuff for some of those guys is just way too high. I don't see it working out.
Yeah, that's why they're distressed assets, though, right? It's like you can get someone.
Well, of course.
Yeah, he has the talent, and he's gonna be super cheap because there's all these problems that come with him. And I think, when the Mavericks got Kyrie, it was universally panned as a horrible move because you couldn't count on him, and you didn't know if he was going to show up and play. And they had the COVID and
he's
the
a cancer in the locker room.
Cancer in the locker room, and then 2 years later, they're playing in the NBA Finals, right? So, it's a team by team scenario where it's like, okay, are we willing to take the risk on this guy? Because for every good, or for every time it's paid off that I can mention, there's a time where it's failed horribly. And you just got to decide, if you're the team, are we willing to take the risk and take the swing? And I look at my team, who is stuck roster construction wise and is probably going to lose one of our top scorers. And it's like, God, well, what can we even do this offseason? That's where I'm more willing to be like, okay, we're going to give you Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, and our shitty pick from this shitty draft. and you give us Zach LaVine and Alex Caruso, and I take the swing on LaVine by taking that $40 million salary on, and I pick up a real asset in Alex Caruso. That's the type of move I'd like to see my team make, but it's a team by team. Like, if you're the Heat, are you willing to bring in like Klay Thompson? Like, if you could just bring him in for free, basically, is it worth it? Do you think you could rehab him and get him back to a point where he's a contributor?
So I got a question for you then. All right, would you be more comfortable taking someone with an injury history or like off-court social like view kind of issues?
So it depends what the off-court issues are. I mean, if it's Miles Bridges, I don't want him just because I don't want to root for him as a fan.
Yeah.
Like if I'm a GM and I'm trying to win games, I'm not as worried about that kind of stuff. But me as a Sacramento Kings fan, if you're like, hey, you can do the LaVine Caruso thing or you can get Miles Bridges, I would just do the LaVine Caruso thing because, like, if this guy comes in and he's awesome, I'm just going to be like, God, I hate rooting for this team because one of our best players missed a whole year because of domestic abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm a GM and I'm like, this guy's played 82 games a year and he's really good, give me that guy.
My next question would
be my job's to win games. This guy's gonna more of a sure thing to help me win games.
My next question would be like, is there any possibility that he would have the opportunity to rehab his image like Mike Vick did? Or is it just two different leagues, two different sets of fan bases, like not doable? Or like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think people don't care about Miles Bridges because he plays in Charlotte right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so I think if he comes to like a bigger, he goes to like a big market, like let's say the Lakers take a chance on him and put him with LeBron James and he's good, I think people would totally ignore the DV thing because it happened while he was in Charlotte. I don't know, Matt, how do you feel about that?
No, I think you're spot on there. I don't want him. Like, I think that what we know happened with that whole situation, like, is pretty egregious. And I think that, like, I think it says a lot about you as a person that it happened in general. So for me to believe that you're going to do a total heel turn and, like, really just be a different person, kind of a huge leap in logic there. I obviously, like, yeah, there's a lot of job security issues when you are going after someone with serious injury issues like Zach LaVine. Like, you're taking a real big swing there. But I mean, out of the guys that we mentioned, I feel like the happy medium is Mikal Bridges. Just go get some noodles.
Yeah, Noodles would be my favorite choice, but I also think Noodles is going to be way more expensive.
Yeah,
than these other guys.
Yes, he will because he's got 2 years that he's under contract for on a reasonable contract. And so, yeah, you're less motivated to get rid of that guy. And, like, look, I think that's also worth it, right? To have less risk when you acquire the guy too. So it's not a simple conversation to figure out whether or not that's, whether or not you actually send that. But, like, if I had to do it, that's probably the direction I'm going. I do think that Bridges is the kind of player that if you already have a guy that you know is going to be your number one, he has a hell of a lot more value to you. Because I think we saw a significant drop off in his defensive abilities since he's been forced into being like a number one offensive option. And there's only so much energy that a man can expend on the floor. So if he can kind of be the number two guy offensively, but still be a dog on defense, I think you're going to be pretty happy with that.
Mikal Bridges is like the optimal guy for the Knicks, I think, to
Yeah.
pair with Jalen Brunson. But yeah, those are the types of guys I would look at this season to really like improve my team if I was up against it. Um, the only other topic I had before we sign off, the NBA draft is 1 week from tonight. We're recording on the 19th of June, and it's June 26th and 27th. You guys have any draft takes you want to throw out before we get there? I think we've kind of talked
This
ad nauseum on this
this draft
podcast
is
about,
bad.
yeah, that's it's kind of been the point on this podcast. My only real take on this draft right now is that with the lack of top end talent, I would really, if I had a high pick, I'd really be looking at someone who I know that they have something they can bring to the table. So I really like Klingon, the 7'3" center from UConn, because yeah, like his offensive game is probably going to leave a lot to desire in the NBA, but I know for sure that he can be a defensive anchor at the next level. And watching Kristaps in the finals and the way that he altered shots and, even when he wasn't blocking them, the way that he changed things in the lane at that height and that arm length, that's alluring to me to have that kind of guy, as opposed to like Alexander Sarr, who is supposedly going to be the first pick, the 7-foot guy from France who's playing in Australia right now, and like doesn't even start for his Australian team. And he's supposed to be like, they're like, oh yeah, the 7'1" guy can be a defensive anchor. And then you go on his Tankathon profile and it says like 4 negatives next to defensive rating in the Australian league. It's like, oh God.
Does this sound familiar?
Yeah. Well, you like read about him and it's like, he's a guard stuck in a big man's body. And I'm like, I don't want a guard stuck in a big man's body.
Yeah, like this is Darko all over again.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
Darko was doing nothing overseas. Nothing. And everyone was like, he should be the number 2 pick right behind LeBron.
Yeah, that's a lot of these guys that are in this draft that are coming from overseas. It's kind of like, well, their draft age is really good, but they don't really do anything else well. And you look at like Klingon, and it's like, God, he does all these things really well. It's just like he's not an ideal center for the NBA, but he can bring a lot to your team. I look at someone like Dalton Connect, who it's like his biggest negative is that he's old, but he's going to be able to fill it up in the NBA. We know he's going to be able to be a spot up shooter and like at least a rotational guy. And in a draft that's that bad, I'd be like, God, I'd rather just get someone I know is going to be able to contribute than take a huge swing on some dude who can't even start in Australia. Because like, how is that guy supposed to come to the NBA and be a starter?
Draft class is super weak this time around. There's a lot of guys looking like they're coming from like France or like overseas, and then some G League guys. Obviously, I'm really curious. I don't think he's gonna have like a splash impact or anything, but I'm really curious to see how Zach Edey turns out. Like honestly, I think that if somebody could establish him with a inside out kind of plan, I think that could be really good, and that could open up more opportunities for like wing play. So a guard dominated team I think would do really well to pick him. But outside of the stuff that like I'm looking at right here, I don't see anyone that just totally stands out as like somebody I would have to have.
I have a small bet on Kentucky guard Reed Shepherd to go first overall. It's plus 3,000 right now. If you look at like all the advanced metrics on his shooting, he's in like the 95th to 100th percentile for every single shooting metric in college last year, where it's like catch and shoot off the dribble, shoot off of handoffs, like every single shooting thing. It's just like he can shoot the goddamn ball. And the worry was like, okay, people are going to target him. He's kind of small. He's maybe not super athletic. And then he goes to the combine and has a 42-inch vertical, which is tied for the highest at the combine. So I don't think the Hawks would take him first overall, but like, could the Wizards be like, hey, we want to trade up a spot and just grab this guy because we want him that bad and it's not going to cost us a lot to move up in this draft. I could just see like an outside chance that with the shooting and with the athleticism, somebody talks themselves into him within the next week. And it's just like, hey, yeah, we're going to take Reed Shepard. This kid can shoot the shit out of the ball. And that's a way better attribute than anybody else in this draft class has. And it's plus 3,000. I was like, eh.
Oh, what's funny is that generally speaking, in the lottery, it's not super great to like draft for need, right? Like if you're in the lottery, your team is probably devoid enough of talent that you just want to take like really the best guy and you'll figure it out from there. This is a year where you really are like kind of incentivized to draft for need because like there's nobody good enough that you're like, well, yeah, we really missed out on him, right? So, like, you really can go into this draft and be like, okay, so what are the roles on this team that we need to fill and draft for that? Because you're really not going to miss out on like the home run.
Yeah, I think if anything, I would just be super pissed if I was a Hawks fan and be like, God, we jumped up 9 spots to get to number 1, and there's just like nobody really worth note in this draft. Imagine if like they had jumped up to number 1 in a draft where there's like a Zion or like an Anthony Davis, and you're like, oh shit, now I can pair that guy with Trae Young. I could probably trade like DeJounte Murray and get some stuff back, and all of a sudden I'm excited about my team. And it's like, no, I jump up to get the number 1 overall pick, and I have to draft a backup from Australia. Fucking fantastic.
You don't have to. It's their choice.
Yeah.
There are other choices they could have made. Like,
yeah, but are the Hawks a smart organization, would you say?
no.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll leave that one there. The only other thing I want to say about Reed Shepard is like I bet on him to potentially get picked first overall. I will come back on this podcast next week and absolutely crush somebody if they take him first overall because, like, yes, all this stuff looks great with the shooting and the athleticism and stuff. I also remember that first round game of the NCAA tournament against Oakland, local Oakland, where I was like, okay,
go Bears.
I'm going to watch this game and I'm going to watch like Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepard because these guys are supposed to be lottery picks. And I was like, where the fuck is Reed Shepard? He took 5 shots in that game, 3 shots. He took 3 shots in that game and hit 1 of them. And it was at the very end of the game. Like he was 0 for 2 with 0 points for the vast majority of the game. And when that happens against Oakland on a big stage and Jack Golke's fucking dropping bombs on you the whole game, I'm like, okay, I don't know if this kid has it, honestly. And that would be the biggest fear for me is like, if I just don't think you have it on the court, you can shoot the shit out of the ball all you want, kid. I'm not taking you. And maybe he'll be awesome at the next level, right? But that game would scare me away. But all right, that is it for us. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up at Gmail, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. You can find our videos on TikTok, Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It's a long name, but you can't miss it. Fouled Out is also now available on YouTube. Our entire backlog of podcasts have been uploaded to YouTube, and the weekly episodes are also dropping on YouTube. Thank you to our RSS feed. Guys, any final thoughts before we sign off? Clint, you want to tell me about another seemingly innocent video game character that you despise?
Let me think. I got one that is probably like here's one that I like that is probably a surprise. I like Astrobot. Like Astrobot is I think Astrobot's a better PlayStation mascot than Sackboy ever was. I don't need to live back when Little Big Planet was a thing and all the user created content was just like dicks floating in like the background while you're doing platforming. So Astro Boy's good. Or Astrobot is good. Astro Boy is good too. That's a good anime, but whatever. That'll be what I leave you with today.
Did you watch the new Astro Boy anime on Netflix?
I have not.
Pretty good, actually. It's like a kind of darker telling of a anime that was like loosely based on Astro Boy. So like Astro Boy's in it, but it's not about him. It's about a investigator who's investigating robot murders, and like Astro Boy's like on the hit list. You may not know this about me. I think the fans of the podcast know this about me, but I'm a big anime fan.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I've pretty much seen them all. I'm trying to get Matt into it, and I was like putting together a whole list for Matt of like the more vanilla stuff, like gradually descending into like the really fucked up shit that I
Matt,
like.
you just gotta start out with OPM. Just watch OPM.
We need to make a schedule for it. Like that's what needs to happen. So
This the podcast
100%.
Once we don't have basketball and football to talk about, it's going to be like, hey, so how did you feel about Full Metal Brotherhood Alchemist? Oh, it was good. Okay, here's something super fucked up I want you to watch.
I want you to watch One Punch Man first. That'll get you in. And then I want you to watch Neon Genesis Evangelion.
I think Evangelion is such a good recommendation because it starts off and you're like, oh, this is going to be like a mecha anime. Cool. And it just gradually gets more and more crazy until the end where it's just absolutely insane. So
it's very like theological. It makes you think. Mm-hmm. Like that's like one of the cool things about it.
We'll save that for next week. Hockey playoffs getting really interesting now with the Oilers trying to come back from 3-0. It's now 3-2. Game 6 is on Friday. So we'll see if they can pull that one off. NBA draft next week. And then we will be back next week after the NBA draft to discuss the goings-ons, the trades, getting into the offseason stuff. And I think we're only a few weeks out from starting NBA top 30. So that's coming up as well. So
yeah, we gotta reach out to Devin.
Yeah, we gotta start voting. So we'll organize that, but you guys all enjoy the NBA draft next week, and then go talk to you guys soon.
Yep. Fuck you, Monty.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, Robin.
Take it easy.